Imagine a king so obsessed with one woman that he changed the religion of an entire nation just to marry her. Imagine becoming the most powerful queen in England, only to lose everything just 3 years later. She was celebrated as England's brightest star and then condemned as a traitor. Today, Anne Boleyn remains one of the history's most mysterious and controversial queens. Was she an ambitious woman who manipulated the king, or was she the victim of political enemies and a ruthless husband? This is an extraordinary story of Anne Boleyn, a story of ambition, love, power, and betrayal. Welcome back to the History Era. Today, we travel to 16th century England, a land ruled by magnificent castles, noble families, political conspiracies, and one of the history's most unpredictable monarchs, King Henry VIII. When people hear Henry VIII's name, they usually remember one thing: his 6 wives. But among them all, no woman changed England more than Anne Boleyn. Without her, there might never have been a Church of England. There might never have been Queen Elizabeth I, and England itself might have followed a completely different path. But before Anne became the queen, she was simply a young girl with no idea that a destiny would place a crown upon her head. Around the year 1501, although historians still debate the exact date, she was born into one of the England's rising noble families. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was a respected diplomat who served the English crown. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, belonged to one of England's oldest aristocratic families. Unlike many noble women of her time, Anne's parents believed education was just as important as beauty. While most girls learned only household duties and the religious instructions, Anne was given something extraordinary. She learned languages, history, music, poetry, religion, and politics. She became fluent in French and understood Latin. She loved reading books that many women were never allowed to study. Even as a child, she stood apart from everyone else. She was curious, quick witted, independent, traits that would later both elevate and destroy her. When Annie was still very young, her father arranged something almost unimaginable. Instead of remaining in England, she was sent abroad. This decision would completely change her future. Her first destination was Netherlands. She joined the court of Margaret of Austria, one of the Europe's most powerful women. Margaret Palace wasn't simply a royal residence. It was a center of learning artists, writers, scholars, diplomats. They gathered there from across the Europe. Young Anne absorbed everything. She learned how powerful people thought, how kingdoms were governed, how diplomacy worked. She watched intelligent women influence politics without ever sitting on throne. Those lessons stayed with her forever. After several years, Anne moved once again, and this time to France. If England seemed sophisticated, France was breathtaking. The French royal court was considered the most elegant in Europe. Magnificent places sparkled with gold, music echoed with endless halls, silk gowns shimmered beneath the candlelight, artists created masterpieces, poets entertained nobles. Every day felt like a grand celebration. Anne quickly adapted. She mastered the graceful dancing, elegant conversations, fashion, music, court etiquettes, and soon she became one of the most admired young ladies serving Queen Claude of France. But Anne learned something even more valuable. She discovered confidence. Unlike many English noblewomen, she remained quiet in the presence of powerful men. French women often spoke boldly. Anne embraced this confidence. She developed a sharp sense of humor. She wasn't afraid to express opinions. She became known not merely for the beauty, but for the intelligence. Contemporary descriptions suggest Anne wasn't considered the most conventionally beautiful woman in Europe. She had a dark hair, dark eyes, an expressive face, a graceful figure. Yet almost everyone agreed on one thing: she possessed extraordinary charm. People noticed her the moment she entered a room, and soon England would notice too. Around 1522, Anne returned to the England after the years abroad. The young girl who had left England returned as an elegant, educated woman. Her sophistications immediately impressed the royal court. She became a lady in waiting to the Queen Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was respected throughout Europe. She was intelligent, deeply religious, and had been Henry VIII's queen for nearly 20 years. At first, Anne admired the queen. She served her faithfully. No one could imagine that this young attendant would one day replace her mistress on England's throne. Anne quickly attracted attention. She danced beautifully. She spoke fluent French. She dressed according to the latest continental fashions. Most importantly, she could hold fascinating conversations. Unlike many courtiers who simply agreed with everyone around them, Anne challenged ideas. She made people think. Even more powerful men found themselves captivated by her wit. Among those men was the king himself. At this point in the history, Henry VIII appeared to be the perfect Renaissance king. Tall, athletic, handsome, an excellent horseman, a talented musician. He spoke several languages. He enjoyed hunting, writing poetry, and participating in the grand tournaments. European rulers admired him. Foreign ambassadors praised him. England seemed prosperous under his rule, but behind the magnificent image, Henry carried one enormous burden. He desperately wanted a son. Although Queen Catherine had become pregnant several times, most of her children died. Only one survived, Princess Mary. In Tudor England, a daughter was not considered enough to secure the future of kingdom. Henry feared civil war after his death without a male heir. Everything he built could collapse. This fear slowly consumed him. What began as a disappointment eventually became obsession. He believed God was punishing him, and then Anne was entered in his life. Around 1526, Henry VIII noticed Anne in a completely different way. By then, she had already attracted many admirers, but she wasn't interested in becoming another nobleman's wife. Nor was she willing to become the king's mistress. This shocked Henry. Most women would have accepted such attention immediately. Being the king's favorite brought wealth, power, influence. Anne refused, whether motivated by morality, ambition, or intelligence. Historians still debate. But her answer changed the history. She wanted only one thing, and that was marriage. Henry had never encountered such resistance. Instead of losing interest, he became completely fascinated. He began writing any passionate love letters. Some still survive today. In them, Henry called himself a loyal servant. He promised gifts, titles, and everlasting devotions. Every rejection only strengthened his determination. Soon his attraction became an obsession, and England itself would pay the price. Henry VIII believed nothing could stand between him and Anne, but one obstacle remained: his wife, Queen Catherine of Aragon, to marry Anne. Henry would have to challenge not only his queen, but the Pope himself. His decisions would divide the families and shake the Europe, forever change the history of England. By 1527, King Henry VIII had reached a break point. For nearly 20 years, he had been married to Queen Catherine of Aragon, and she was respected across the Europe, admired for her intelligence, kindness, and unwavering faith. But despite their long marriage, Catherine had failed to produce. Henry believed England desperately needed a healthy male heir. Princess Mary was alive, but Henry feared that a woman on the throne would plunge England into the Civil War. As his feelings for Anne grew stronger, Henry convinced himself that his marriage to Catherine had never been blessed by God. His reasonings came from the Bible. Catherine had previously been married to the Henry's older brother, Prince Arthur. Although Catherine insisted that marriage had never been consummated, Henry now claimed that marrying his brother's widow had brought a divine curse upon England. He wanted the Pope to declare his marriage invalid, not a divorce, an annulment. If granted, it would mean the marriage had never legally existed. Henry believed the Pope would quickly approve his request, but he was wrong. Pope Clement VII found himself trapped. On one side stood Henry VIII, King of England, and on the other stood Emperor Charles V, the most powerful ruler in Europe. Charles was not only the Holy Roman Emperor, he was also the Queen Catherine's nephew. Approving Henry's annulment would deeply insult one of Europe's most powerful monarchs. So the Pope delayed. Months became years. Envoys travelled between England and Rome. Lawyers argued. Cardinals debated. Henry waited and waited, but no decision came. As the years passed, Henry grew increasingly frustrated. He began to believe that the Pope no longer had authority to decide England's future. If Rome would not free him, perhaps England could free itself. Henry's advisers proposed an extraordinary solution. If the Pope refused to approve the annulment, why should England continue obeying the Pope at all? It was a revolutionary idea. For nearly 1,000 years, England had recognized the authority of Roman Catholic Church. Now Henry prepared to break that tradition forever. Through a series of parliamentary acts, royal authority expanded while papal influence steadily disappeared. Then came the historic movement. Henry declared himself the supreme head of Church of England. One decision changed everything. England was no longer under the Pope's authority. Monasteries would later be dissolved. Church land would be seized by the crown. Religious life across England would never be the same again. And at the center of this enormous political and religious transformation stood Anne Boleyn. Many people believed, some praised her, others blamed and feared her. To the supporters, she represented a new England. To her enemies, she was the woman who had destroyed centuries of the religious tradition. By late 1532, Henry believed nothing could stop him. He and Anne secretly married, likely in January 1533. Only a handful of trusted people knew about the ceremony. Soon afterward, Anne became pregnant. Now the kingdom eagerly waited the child everyone hoped would be England's future king. In May 1533, they officially declared Henry's marriage to Catherine invalid. Henry's marriage to Anne was recognized as lawful. The years of waiting was finally over. Anne had become Queen of England. On a magnificent summer day in June 1533, London prepared for one of the most extravagant royal celebrations in its history. The streets were decorated with the colorful banners. Church bells echoed throughout the city. Crowds gathered to witness England's newest queen. Annie wore magnificent robe embroidered with gold. Pearls sparkled beneath the candlelight. A jeweled crown rested upon her head. She travelled through the London street in a lavish royal procession before arriving at Westminster Abbey. There, surrounded by bishops, nobles, ambassadors, and thousands of spectators, Anne Boleyn was crowned Queen of England. For a brief moment, she had everything she had ever dreamed of: power, influence, royal authority. But beneath the celebration, many people remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon. Not everyone accepted Anne as the rightful queen. Some refused even to acknowledge her title. Her reign began under the shadow of Divian. And Anne's pregnancy progressed, excitement spread throughout the kingdom. Every noble family anticipated the birth of England's future king. Preparations were made, celebrations were planned, and royal announcements were drafted in advance. Then on September 7, 1533, Anne gave birth, but the child was not the prince. It was a daughter, Elizabeth. Henry congratulated Anne politely, but disappointment quickly spread throughout the royal court. The celebrations planned for the prince became far more modest. Many believed Anne would soon produce a son. No one imagined that baby Elizabeth would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs. At that moment, she was simply another royal daughter. Despite the disappointments, Anne remained one of the most influential women in Europe. Foreign ambassadors carefully watched her every move. Petitions passed throughout her household. She supported scholars and the religious reformers. She encouraged the translation and study the Bible. Her opinions influenced appointments within the church and the royal court. For the time, Henry still adored her. Together they hunted, held lavish banquets, attended tournaments, and discussed the matters of state. Anne believed her future was secured. She believed she had won. But royal favor was often as fragile as the glass, and one tragedy would begin to change everything. Anne became pregnant again. The kingdom hoped this time the child would finally be the long awaited prince. Instead, she suffered a miscarriage. Henry tried to remain hopeful. Another pregnancy followed. Again, it ended in a heartbreak. The greatest blow came in early 1536 when Anne lost another pregnancy, believed by many historians to have been a boy. Henry was devastated. Year of sacrifice, conflict with Rome, political upheaval. All had been for the dream of a male heir. Now the dream seemed further away than ever. Around the same time, Henry's attention drifted towards the other young woman. Her name was Jane Seymour. Quite gentle, respectful, and very different from Anne's bold and outspoken personality. For the first time, she realized she might lose everything, and the enemies she had made over the years were waiting for the exactly same moment. The queen who had inspired the king to reshape England now found herself surrounded by the enemies. Henry's love was fading, Jane Seymour was rising. Court politics turned deadly. Within months, Anne Boleyn would be arrested, imprisoned in Tower of London and accused of shocking crimes that many historians still believe were fabricated. Only a few years earlier, she had been the woman for whom a king had challenged the Pope and transformed England's religious landscape. Now the royal court whispered against her. The birth of the healthy son, the one thing Henry VIII had hoped for above all else, had never came. After several pregnancies and heartbreaking miscarriages, the king's patience was fading. Unlike Anne, Jane was a gentle, reserved, and careful with every word she spoke. Henry began spending more and more time with Jane. Anne noticed this. She understood exactly what it meant, and the history was beginning to repeat itself. Just as the Catherine of Aragon had once lost Henry's affection to Anne was now losing Henry to someone else. On the morning of May 2, 1536, Anne attended a royal tournament. Everything appeared normal. Then, without warning, she was summoned before the king's council. Members of the royal guard surrounded her. She was informed that she was under arrest. The accusations were almost unbelievable. Anne was charged with adultery involving several men of the royal court. She was accused of committing incest with her own brother George Boleyn. Most shocking of all, she was accused of plotting the king's death, a crime considered high treason. Anne was stunned. Witnesses later recalled that she repeatedly asked what crime she had committed. No clear answer came. She was escorted throughout London's streets to the Tower of London, the same fortress she had entered 3 years earlier as the King's England's newly crowned queen. She now entered as a prisoner. Inside the tower, Anne was confined to the comfortable chamber rather than a dark dungeon. But comfort could not erase fear. Servants later described her emotions shifting constantly. At times she laughed nervously. At other moments she wept. She prayed for hours. She asked whether the king still intended to spare her. Those around her noticed that despite her fear, Anne never completely lost her dignity. She continued speaking with intelligence and composure. Outside the tower, England was filled with rumors. Some believed Anne was guilty, others believed the charges had been invented. Even today, historians continue to debate the details. However, many modern scholars believe the evidence against Anne was weak and that the accusations were politically motivated. Anne's trial began on May 15, 1536. She stood before a panel of a powerful noblemen, many of whom already spotted the king. The courtroom was crowded. Every eye focused on a woman who had once been England's queen. The prosecution claimed Anne had carried on secret relationships with several men. Among the accused were the court musician Marx Mutant, nobleman Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Breton, and Anne's own brother George Boleyn. Most denied the charges. Marx Mutant confessed, though many historians believe his confessions may have been obtained under intense pressure. Anne defended herself with a remarkable intelligence. She challenged the accusations calmly. She denied every allegation. Despite her defense, the verdict seemed almost inevitable. The jury found her guilty. The sentence was death. Many historians have long debated Henry VIII's role. Did he truly believe Anne was guilty, or had he already decided to replace her? No one can answer with certainty, but timing raised questions. Henry's interest in Jane Seymour had grown stronger. The kingdom still lacked a male heir. Political advisers believed Anne had become a dangerous figure whose influence divided the nation. Whether driven by the politics, disappointment, personal desires, or all three, Henry made no attempt to save the woman he had once pursued with passionate love letters. Within the days of Anne's convictions, preparations quickly began for another royal marriage. At dawn on May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn prepared for death. Unlike most executions in England, Henry ordered a skilled Frenchman to carry out sentence. The sword was considered faster and more merciful than the traditional axe. Dressed in a dark gown beneath a cloak, Anne walked calmly to the execution platform inside the Tower of London. Witnesses later described her remarkable composure. She did not publicly condemn the king. Instead, she prayed for him and acknowledged him as her lawful sovereign. She asked those gathered to pray for her soul. After kneeling in prayer, Anne quietly awaited her fate. Moments later, her life came to an end. She was likely in her early 30s. Her body was buried in the chapel of St. Peter and Vincula within the Tower of London. No grand royal funeral, no magnificent monument, only a simple resting place. Only after 11 days of the Anne's execution, Henry VIII married Jane Seymour. The speed of the marriage shocked many observers. In 1537, Jane finally gave Henry what he had desired for decades, a son, Prince Edward. But Jane died soon after the childbirth. Henry eventually married four more times, yet none of those marriages erased Anne Boleyn from history. When Anne died, her daughter Elizabeth was yet not 3 years old. She was declared illegitimate, stripped of her royal status. Few believed she would have ever become queen. But history had other plans. After the reigns of Edward VI and Mary I, Elizabeth ascended the throne in 1558. Her reign lasted 44 years and known today as Elizabethan age. It became one of the England's greatest period of achievement. Explorations flourished and literature reached extraordinary heights with figures such as William Shakespeare. Trade expanded. England defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588, securing its place as a major European power. The little girl many had once dismissed became one of the greatest monarchs in English history. Nearly 5 centuries later, historians continue to debate Anne's fate. Some argue she was ambitious and politically ruthless. Others believe she became the victim of court intrigue and Henry VIII's changing desire. Most modern historians doubt that charges of adultery and incest were supported by convincing evidence. Many believe they were created to remove a queen who could no longer provide the king with the son he desperately wanted. The truth may never be known with a complete certainty. Anne's life was filled with extraordinary triumph and a heartbreaking tragedy. She inspired a king to reshape a nation, and she became one of England's most famous queens. She faced betrayal, imprisonment, and death with a remarkable courage. And although her enemies believed they had erased her from the history, her legacy endures to the Queen Elizabeth I, whose reign transformed England into one of the greatest power. Today, Anne remains one of the history's most unforgettable women, a queen whose life changed the kingdom forever. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Do you believe Anne Boleyn was the victim of the political conspiracy, or was there more to the story than the history reveals? Until next time, thank you for watching.